Hi YouTubers, and welcome to this second video in the Retrospect series, which I've called this series on Kettle's Geek TV. In Retrospect will be about, of course, retro computers, retro consoles and retro gaming, and I hope you will enjoy them. Now when I say Amiga, what's the first thing that springs to your mind? Yeah, sure, it's girlfriend in Spanish. It is also one of the greatest line of computers ever made, in my opinion at least. The Commodore Amiga 500 was one of the leading home computer in Europe in the mid-80s. Superior graphics, superb audio quality and multitasking OS made these machines ahead of the pack for several years. Now we all know that Commodore went bankrupt in 1994, which is quite scary and sad how it can go downhill for a company that pushed so great hardware since the 70s. Look at the Commodore 64 for instance, a super hit. Today we're going to look at a system, the last system that came out of the assembly line at Commodore, the CD32.
Our world would never be the same again.
The Amiga CD32, codenamed Spellbound, was introduced in 1993 at the Science Museum in London by Commodore Vice President of Engineering Lou Eggebrecht. It hit the shelves in September the same year. The magazine Amiga Format had foreseen the CD gaming system like so. Now they weren't that far off. Now looking back 3 years earlier, Commodore had done a feeble attempt to compete in the console market with the 64GS, a cartridge-based console with almost identical hardware as the C64.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
From experience, Commodore should have known that stuffing outdated hardware into a new case is never a good idea. Take the Atari XCGS that I reviewed, for example. Or what about the lackluster Amstrad GX4000? Also in 1990, the company launched the CD-TV under the Amiga banner. It was more of a multimedia device like the Philips CDI. The project manager of the CD-TV, Atari founder Nolan Bushnell, stated, and I quote, "CD-TV will truly change the way people learn and are entertained. It's the real new media of the 90s. In the real world, customers were confused because the machine could also be turned into a computer. So was it really a computer? Or a next generation VCR? You probably know or have guessed this was a disaster. And Commodore's planned CD-TV2 or CD-TV CR was never released to the general public." Now we talked a little bit about the 64GS and the CD-TV. They both came out in 1990, and 2 years later Commodore would release 3 new home computers: the Amiga 600, the legendary Amiga 1200 and the Amiga 4000, their top model. Now as for speculations on why would Commodore now in 93 with the release of the CD32 want to move from the home computer market, where they've been very successful, to the console market. Well, I read an interesting comparison actually in the Enquirer where they compared it to the Microsoft strategy in 2001, where Microsoft successfully evolved from the Windows games to the Xbox. And I guess that was much of the same vision for Commodore back in '93. Now, in many ways, Commodore could have succeeded with the CD32. Look at the great games developers they had good agreements with. You had Gremlin, Bitmap Brothers, Core, Ocean, and Electronic Arts. And the CD32 didn't do half bad when it came to sales in the UK. It sold around 100,000 units, and it actually outsold the Sega Amiga CD and the PC CD-ROM, which was a great achievement at the time, because look at the market. You had the good old Sega Genesis, fans of that. You had the Super Nintendo with great games, fantastic peripherals, and you had the 3DO, which came out in the US a couple of weeks later. So if it hadn't been for that they didn't really get any dedicated games developed for the CD32. It was mostly ported games from Amiga 1200 and A500 with improved audio due to the CD format. And hadn't it been for problems like that, they could have done better, I think. But again, you can't get around that Commodore were in huge financial trouble when they launched the CD32. Later they actually owned $10 million due to a patent infringement, and that really tore down the company. And due to this patent problem, the US government denied them into taking the CD32 into the US. So in '94, as we know, Commodore went bankrupt, and the company was bought 1 year later on an auction where Dell Computers Company and Escom AG of Germany were the main bidders. Escom AG won with a bargain price of $6.6 million, and they got all the rights to the Commodore Amiga name. So, and actually the Escom era is of course a different story, but I can say that they had huge plans of relaunching the CD32 as a set-top box, amongst other things, for satellite and cable companies. Now, we'll never know how that could have gone, because as you know, Escom AG, they also went down under in '96. So that was a little bit of biography. I hope it didn't bore you to death. Let's jump over to some look at the console design of the Amiga CD32.
Oh yes, and what do you think this big button is for? It's actually the reset button. You could think it's the eject button when you look at it right away, but it's not. If you want to open the CD tray of the system, you simply do like so. Insert the game and off you go. Now look at the console design. I know many people compare it to the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. I'm not entirely there, but I can definitely see the comparison. Now here you have some activity lights, you have power on top, and you have loading on bottom. Here you have a volume slider which controls the volume if you have a headset inserted in this 3.5mm mini jack. Nothing on the side here. Now here we can see the back of the unit, and on the right side you have the standard RCA output, your white and red audio and composite video. You could also connect an S-video cable if you prefer that, and of course the magnificent RF out. Here you would input the power supply. You also have the on-off button on the back of the CD32. Now this screw here, if you unscrew that, you can take off this lid, and it will reveal a very interesting aspect of this system. Namely, the expansion port. Now if you could only get this lid off here. Yeah. Now look at this thing. It's quite huge. And here you can fit expansions like the full motion video MPEG decoder board, a
kind of a codec of its time, which was quite exciting. RAM expansions, floppy, parallel, hard disk interface like IDE, SCSI, networking, PCM photo CD support was also planned, I think, and a third-party vendor called Paravision